Chapter 1. The Signal from Proxima. The first anomaly appeared in the quietest hour of the night. Dr. Elena Marquez, astrophysics lead at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, was scrolling through routine stellar activity reports when the Proxima Centauri system's monitor began to flicker. At 2:17 Universal Time Coordinated, the automated alert system registered a spike in extreme ultraviolet radiation emissions from Proxima b, the rocky exoplanet orbiting the red dwarf star 4.2 light-years away. "Wait! That can't be right," Elena muttered, tapping her keyboard to recalibrate the telescope data. The K2-33b style transit model they'd been using predicted stable stellar winds for another 18 months. But the graph now showed a radiation flux peaking at 1.2 times 10 to the power of 15 ergs/cm superscript 2/s in the 10 to 100 nanometer range, way beyond the worst-case solar flare recorded on Earth, the 2012 STO event that had narrowly missed frying the power grid. Beside her, the wall-mounted hollow map of the inner solar system suddenly lit up with warning markers. Every satellite in geostationary orbit, GPS, communications, weather monitoring, began transmitting error codes. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she remembered the 1989 Quebec blackout, caused by a much weaker coronal mass ejection. This wasn't just a solar storm. This was a super flare, the kind of stellar tantrum that astronomers had only observed in distant M dwarfs. And Proxima Centauri, Earth's closest stellar neighbor, was now throwing one. "Jack, you need to see this," she said into her comm, patching through to Jack Harper, FEMA's chief of electromagnetic pulse, EMP, preparedness. The former Marine-turned-disaster specialist was already on his way to the command center, his boots echoing in the empty hallway. By the time Jack entered, Elena had pulled up the Doppler shift calculations. "It's moving at 10% the speed of light," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "That means the radiation front will hit Earth in 41 hours, 23 minutes. Jack whistled low. The 2019 National Academy of Sciences report on EMP threats had warned about exactly this scenario. Radiation intense enough to induce ground currents strong enough to melt transformer cores in power grids. But those simulations had assumed a solar event. No one had seriously considered an exoplanetary superflare. Survival probability at 70%, Elena murmured, more to herself than Jack. The AI-driven risk assessment model beside her projected the first wave, 90% chance of global satellite failure, 85% probability of widespread power outages in high-latitude regions. The numbers glowed red, like a countdown clock. At 3 o'clock, the first amateur astronomers began posting videos of Proxima Centauri blazing brighter than usual in the southern sky. By dawn, every major news outlet was broadcasting interviews with astrophysicists, all repeating the same phrase. This is an extinction-level event in slow motion. Elena's team confirmed the flare's composition. A tsunami of X-rays and extreme ultraviolet radiation, followed by a cloud of charged particles moving at 20% C. The radiation dose at Earth's surface would peak at 5 sieverts over 90 minutes, enough to kill 50% of exposed humans within a month, according to the 2006 UNSCR report on space radiation effects. But the immediate danger was electromagnetic. The rapid change in magnetic fields would induce currents in every conductive material, from power lines to household wiring. In Houston, the Johnson Space Center lost contact with the International Space Station at 8:12. The astronauts, shielded in the station's water tank-lined emergency module, began broadcasting panic updates before their signal cut out. On the ground, transformers in South Africa's Coburg nuclear power plant overheated, triggering automatic shutdowns. The first blackout hit Cape Town at 9:03, plunging 4 million people into darkness. Jack's comm buzzed with updates from FEMA's regional offices. The Northeast Power Coordinating Council reported voltage fluctuations in the Eastern Interconnection Grid, the largest power network in the world. "Start flipping the switches," he told his team, referring to the prepositioned EMP-hardened generators in key cities. But even he knew it was a Hail Mary. The 2013 EMP Commission report had estimated it would take 18 months to rebuild a modern power grid from scratch. Elena stared at the telescope feed, now showing Proxima Centauri as a seething red orb. She thought of her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, asleep in their Maryland home. The emergency shelter they'd built in the basement, lined with copper mesh, stocked with 30 days of food, suddenly felt like a child's fort against a hurricane. At noon, the first birds began falling from the sky. Migratory species with magnetic receptors in their brains were the first casualties, their navigation systems fried by the incoming radiation's electromagnetic noise. In Florida, a flock of 2,000 sandhill cranes crashed into the Walt Disney World parking lot, their bodies twitching as if struck by invisible lightning. By 1800 hours, the survival probability had dropped to 62%. Satellite imagery showed the Van Allen radiation belts expanding, their normally contained particles now spilling into the upper atmosphere, creating unnatural auroras over the equator, green and purple waves rippling over the Amazon, the Congo, the Sahara. Beautiful, Elena thought, in the way of wildfires, beautiful, a display of raw, destructive power. Jack stood beside her, watching the holomap flicker as more grid nodes went dark. "Remember the 2012 flare?" he said. "We got lucky then." "This time, luck isn't a factor." Elena nodded, recalling the 2012 event that had narrowly missed Earth by 9 days. Solar physicists had later called it a once-in-1,000-year event. But Proxima Centauri, a variable star prone to violent outbursts, had just thrown a flare 100 times more powerful. As night fell, the first ground-level effects began. Car ignitions failed in northern Europe, their electronic control units fried by induced currents. Emergency sirens wailed in Stockholm, their tones warped by voltage fluctuations. In New York, the lights of the Empire State Building flickered and died, joining the growing patchwork of darkness on the East Coast. Elena checked her watch. 2,200 hours. 19 hours until the radiation front arrived. She wondered if Lily would remember the sound of her voice, the last time she'd kissed her goodbye at the daycare. Or she'd just be another data point in the AI's probability model, a faceless statistic in the great culling of a species that thought itself invincible. Somewhere, deep in the recesses of her mind, she heard the echo of Carl Sagan's words. "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." But tonight, the cosmos seemed to know only one thing: how to end the world. The survival probability ticked down to 58%. Chapter 2. The Radiation Front. The final 12 hours before impact became a race against physics. At 4 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, the World Health Organization activated its International Health Regulations Emergency Committee, releasing a stark advisory. All humans within 30 degrees latitude of the poles must seek full-body shielding within Faraday cages or underground structures. The 2017 ICRP publication 132 on radiation protection echoed in Elena's mind. 5 sieverts was the threshold for acute radiation syndrome, and their models now predicted peak doses of 7.2 sieverts in unshielded areas. Jack's team had already rerouted the remaining functional satellites to create a patchwork communication network, using the 2008 developed HAARP ionospheric heaters to bounce signals off the disturbed upper atmosphere. It was a jury-rigged solution borrowed from post-EMP contingency plans, but initial tests showed 40% signal degradation over the Atlantic. "Better than nothing," he grunted, watching engineers in Chernobyl-style lead suits manually override control systems at the Palo Verde nuclear generating station in Arizona. Elena focused on the atmospheric models. The extreme UV radiation would ionize the stratosphere's ozone layer at an unprecedented rate. NASA's 2023 TOM satellite data showed a 37% ozone depletion spike in the first hour of impact. Without ozone, the sun's UVB radiation would pour through, doubling skin cancer rates within days. But that was a secondary concern to the immediate electromagnetic onslaught. At 7 o'clock, the first radiation-hardened drones launched from Area 51. Their fiber optic networks and lead-shielded processors designed to withstand up to 10 sieverts. Their live feed showed the Van Allen belts as a roiling sea of green, the normally invisible radiation now visible as a shimmering curtain descending toward the equator. In Nairobi, amateur photographers captured images of the sky glowing like fractured glass, prismatic colors refracting through the ionized atmosphere. Survival probability 51%. The AI intoned, the first dip below 50%. Elena's console showed the eastern interconnection grid, losing node after node. Transformers in Pennsylvania and New Jersey had begun melting, their copper windings turning to liquid metal within their steel casings. The 2013 Department of Energy report on grid resilience had warned about this exact failure mode, but no one had budgeted for a threat originating 4.2 light-years away. At 10 o'clock, the first human casualties were reported. A group of astronomers in Chile's Atacama Desert, attempting to photograph the Proxima flare, collapsed within minutes of exposure. Their dosimeters recorded 3 sieverts in 15 minutes, enough to cause nausea, hair loss, and internal organ damage. Hospitals in Santiago activated their radiation triage protocols, pulling out the 1980s-era lead aprons and potassium iodide tablets stockpiled for nuclear accidents. Jack received a call from the Pentagon. The Navy's electromagnetic railguns, designed to operate in high EMP environments, were being repurposed to power emergency grids in D.C. and New York. It was a Hail Mary. The weapons were never meant for civilian use, but their Faraday cage generators offered the only hope for critical infrastructure. "Give me a status on the underground data centers," he barked, referring to the DOE salt vault in Kansas, which stored 80% of the nation's genomic data in lead-line vaults. Elena's daughter, Lily, was en route to the Maryland State Emergency Shelter, a converted subway tunnel lined with 10 centimeters of steel plating. The last video call had shown the child huddled with other children, her face pale but curious as a female worker explained the big thunderstorm in space. Elena forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the incoming particle flux data. Now moving at 19% the speed of light, just 3 hours from impact. At 1300 hours, the global positioning system failed entirely. Ships in the Indian Ocean lost navigation, their compasses spinning wildly as the Earth's magnetic field oscillated like a struck chord. Pilots of the last remaining commercial flights, all Boeing 747s with analog backup systems, began emergency descents, relying on visual flight rules in the sky turned kaleidoscopic by ionospheric disturbances. The first ground-level ionization began at 1445. Streetlights in Tokyo exploded in showers of sparks, their sodium vapor bulbs ionized by the incoming radiation. Cars with electronic ignition stalled en masse, leaving highways in Berlin and Los Angeles gridlocked with immobile vehicles. People poured out of office buildings, staring at the shimmering sky as if expecting a meteor shower, unaware that the invisible killer was already penetrating their bodies, DNA strands breaking, white blood cells dying, cellular machinery grinding to a halt. Jack ordered the activation of the 2016-era EMP Protection Act protocols, which authorized the immediate shutdown of non-essential grid components to prevent cascading failures. In Texas, engineers manually opened circuit breakers at the Manzano Microelectronics Center, protecting the last remaining quantum-resistant servers, though their cryogenic superconducting systems were already showing thermal fluctuations from a magnetic turbulence. Elena watched as the first X-ray photons hit the upper atmosphere, creating a rippling effect in the telescope imagery, like a stone dropped into a pool of ionized gas. The ionosphere, normally a stable layer at 100 kilometers altitude, was now a chaotic mess of charged particles, reflecting radio waves in unpredictable patterns. Ham radio operators reported hearing echoes of their own voices, delayed by milliseconds as signals bounced off the fractured ionosphere. At 1500 hours exactly, the radiation front hit. The sky turned white, brighter than sunlight, a searing luminance that burned afterimages into retinas. Birds in mid-flight convulsed and fell, their nervous systems fried by the sudden electromagnetic pulse. In the Arctic, reindeer herds panicked, their magnetic sense overwhelmed by the roiling fields. On the International Space Station, the last surviving camera showed the Earth's surface glowing like a neon sign. Every conductor, power lines, pipelines, even the steel rebar in buildings, acting as an antenna for the incoming radiation. The survival probability plummeted to 42%. In the Goddard Command Center, the emergency lights kicked on as the main power failed. Elena and Jack huddled behind a steel-reinforced console, their bodies shielded by the room's built-in Faraday cage. Outside, the hum of air conditioning died, replaced by the distant scream of sirens, now running on battery power, their tones warped by the fluctuating magnetic field. Grid status? Jack shouted into his military-grade radio, which used encrypted VLF waves to penetrate the electromagnetic noise. East coast gone, west coast flickering, came the garbled reply. Transformer failures in 47 states. Backup generators in D.C. lasted 12 seconds before the EMP fried their circuit boards. Elena's console, powered by a lead-acid battery, showed the radiation dose inside the shelter, 0.8 sieverts and climbing. The copper mesh lining was doing its job, but the sheer intensity of the flare was overwhelming even the best shielding. She thought of Lily, 40 miles away in the subway shelter. Its steel walls should keep the dose below 2 sieverts, but the FEMA models had never accounted for prolonged exposure. At 1530, the first gamma-ray detectors in Antarctica registered a secondary emission, a surprise, since red dwarfs weren't thought capable of producing gamma rays. Elena's team quickly realized it was Bremsstrahlung radiation, generated as high-energy electrons from the flare interacted with Earth's magnetic field. "This just got worse," she muttered, updating the dose ejections to 9.5 sieverts in unshielded areas. Jack's radio crackled to life with a new voice. The president's science advisor, broadcasting from the underground bunker at Cheyenne Mountain. "We're initiating Operation Noah's Ark," he said, referring to the 2010 contingency plan to protect genetic repositories. Seed vaults in Svalbard are locked down, but we're losing contact with the Houston Zoo's cryogenic labs. Elena closed her eyes, imagining the frozen embryos of thousands of species, tigers, pandas, even a now extinct passenger pigeon, slowly warming as backup generators failed. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, with its meter-thick permafrost and passive cooling, might survive, but the rest were vulnerable. By 1600 hours, the radiation intensity began to subside, though the charged particle cloud would continue bombarding Earth for another 12 hours. The sky returned to a sickly orange, streaked with the remains of the auroras, now tinged with blood red from nitrogen molecule ionization. Elena stepped out of the shelter, her Geiger counter clicking rapidly. The air smelled of ozone and burnt plastic, a chemical tang that clung to her throat. In the parking lot, cars sat dead, their windshields cracked from the sudden temperature fluctuations caused by the electromagnetic induction. A single crow lay on the asphalt, its feathers ruffled, as if it had simply decided to stop living. Jack's face was grim as he checked his portable dosimeter. 3.1 sieverts accumulated in the last hour. "The first wave's over," he said, "but the real disaster is just starting." He was right. Without power, modern medicine couldn't function. Dialysis machines, ventilators, even simple refrigeration for vaccines. Water treatment plants relied on electricity to pump clean water. Within 24 hours, cities would start running out. The 2003 Northeast blackout had caused $6 billion in damages. This was a blackout on a global scale, with a radiation dose on top. Elena looked at the survival probability, now 39%, and thought of Sagan again. We've arranged a global civilization, but that civilization was built on fragile threads of electricity and connectivity, all now severed by a star 4.2 light-years away. Somewhere in the silence of Command Center, a lone computer fan sputtered to a stop. The last light died, and they were left in the dark, listening to the distant roar of a world unmaking itself. Chapter 3. The Long Afternoon. The first hours after the radiation front were a nightmare of stillness and chaos. Streetlights, once symbols of safety, now dangled like broken chandeliers. Glass shards glittering in the amber haze. Cars formed iron graveyards on highways. Engines silent, their digital brains fried. In the distance, 47 Chinooks lumbered overhead, their rotor wash kicking up irradiated dust. Each flight a gamble, their analog systems barely holding against an electromagnetic storm. Elena's Ford F-150 coughed up dust as she navigated backroads, avoiding the main highway's gridlock. At a rural checkpoint, a mob surged around a National Guard truck. People screaming for shelter, food, anything. "They're rationing pills," a man shouted, brandishing the crumpled bottle of potassium iodide. A guard fired a warning shot, the crack echoing like a death knell. Elena floored the gas, tires spinning on gravel, leaving the chaos behind. Her dosimeter pulsed faster, 1.8 sieverts. Inside the subway shelter, a converted red line tunnel, its steel walls now a coffin of hope. Lily lay listless, her stuffed penguin damp with sweat. The nurse, a former ER tech named Sarah, whispered, "We got 20 kids here. No meds, no power, just us." Sarah showed Elena a chart, each child's radiation dose, scrawled in pencil. Lily's line crept upward, 2.3 sieverts. "She's stable for now," Sarah said, but the next flare, her voice trailed off. Elena ventured to shelter's edge, peering through a steel grate at the world above. Acid rain fell in sheets, hissing as it hit the pavement, pooling into murky, radioactive puddles. A crow, half-bald from radiation burns, pecked at a dead squirrel, its beak stained red. In the distance, a billboard flickered. "Visit Proxima Centauri. Book now." A cruel relic of a naive past. Jack, meanwhile, holed up in Fort Meade's bowels, battling to resurrect a 1940s-era radio transmitter. "We can send Morse code to Greenland," he told a weary engineer, "but it's slow." Outside, soldiers clashed with looters raiding the base's fuel depot. "They think we got power," Jack muttered, "but we're running on fumes." His team had jury-rigged a small grid using diesel generators from a nearby Army base, powering a hospital in Annapolis, 20 beds, no AC, nurses working in shifts of 12 hours, their eyes bloodshot from fatigue. Back in the shelter, Elena helped Sarah distribute water, bottles scavenged from a convenience store, now rationed to 500 milliliters per person daily. "The pipes are contaminated," Sarah explained, "so we boil rainwater. But even that's acidic, tastes like battery acid." A toddler wailed in the corner, his skin blistered from UV exposure, the ozone layer now 40% depleted, letting lethal doses of UVB, turning playgrounds into ghost towns. At dusk, Jack's radio crackled to life, a faint signal from Svalbard. "Seed vaults intact," a voice reported, "but cryo labs in Houston lost." Jack slammed his fist against the console. "We saved the seeds, but the animal's gone." The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, a frozen ark, now stood as humanity's last botanical hope. while the world's zoos, their cryogenic tanks dead, became tuned for extinct species. Elena returned to Lily's cot, finding her awake, staring fixed on a flickering LED powered by a bicycle generator, its light dim as a candle. "Mommy," Lily said, "when will the stars come back?" Elena choked back tears, lying, "Soon, baby, soon." Outside, the sky pulsed with unnatural auroras, green, purple, blood red, dancing over cities that no longer existed. Midnight brought a new horror. The first reports of radiation-induced mutations in livestock. A Maryland farm's cows gave birth to stillborn calves with fused limbs, their bodies twisted by DNA damage, a 2017 study on Chernobyl's fallout, now a global reality. Farmers, their faces gaunt, shot the animals, their screams mixing with the wind's howl. Jack's team, desperate, activated a 1950s-era hydroelectric dam in West Virginia, its turbines spinning to life after decades of disuse. For 2 hours, it powered a small town. Lights flickered on, refrigerators hummed, hopes surged, until a transformer overheated, sending sparks into the night. Back to dark. Jack sighed, the survival probability dropping to 28%. In the shelter, Elena held Lily as sleep claimed her, the girl's fever finally breaking. But outside, the world burned. Forests died in UV-induced wildfires. Oceans acidified. Plankton, base of the food chain, perished en masse. The second flare, now 48 hours away, loomed like an executioner's blade. Survival probability, 25%. Chapter 4. The Quiet Before the Storm. The 48 hours between flares were a grotesque interlude, a pause so heavy it felt like the universe itself was bracing for final blow. Elena sat cross-legged on a concrete floor beside Lily's cot, her back against a steel-reinforced wall, counting the child's breast to keep from screaming. Lily's skin had taken on a waxy pallor, the faint rash on her neck now a network of angry red lines, 2.7 sieverts and climbing. The shelter's lone working dosimeter reminded her, its green digits mocking her powerlessness. Jack's team at Fort Meade operated in a haze of sleeplessness, their eyes bloodshot as they stripped a decommissioned Nike Hercules missile site for anything salvageable. These vacuum tubes are from 1958. A grizzled engineer named Marcus Bart, holding up a glass cylinder the size of his fist. They'll melt if we push them too hard. But they pushed anyway, jury-rigging a radio network that connected Denver's emergency bunker to a fishing vessel off the coast of Alaska, the longest game of telephone in history. Jack joked, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Carrier pigeons, their legs banded with coordinates scrawled in indelible ink, took flight every 30 minutes, but by day 2, only 1 in 3 returned, their feathers dusted with radioactive fallout. In the northern hemisphere, the ozone layer, once Earth's protective shield, was now a tattered ruin, its depletion exceeding even the worst-case models. Canadian forests, which had stood for millennia, now resembled skeletons. Pine trees shed their needles in waves, their bark splitting to reveal rotting wood beneath, while in the prairies, wildfires sparked by spontaneous combustion raged unchecked, their smoke a permanent smudge on the horizon. Kansas farmers, wearing patched-together suits of canvas and lead foil, knelt in fields where even dandelions refused to grow, their hands shaking as they sifted sterile soil through their fingers. My granddad said the Dust Bowl was bad. One man muttered, spitting blood-tinged saliva, early radiation sickness, though he didn't know it. This was the end of the bowl. The ocean, Earth's first cradle of life, was now a graveyard. Off the coast of Maine, lobstermen hauled up traps filled with mutated juveniles, their shells fused into grotesque, asymmetrical shapes. In the Gulf of Mexico, coral reefs, once vibrant ecosystems, turned white as bone, their polyps dead from UVB exposure. Seabirds, their navigational instincts fried by electromagnetic interference, crashed into ships or simply floated on the waves, too weak to lift their wings. The stench of rotting plankton, thick, sulfurous, primordial, hung over coastal cities, a constant reminder that the food chain's foundation had crumbled. Elena ventured topside at dawn, escorted by a National Guardsman named Carter, who'd lost 2 fingers to frostbite during a failed supply run. The world outside the shelter was a monochrome nightmare, grass-brown and brittle, skies a permanent shade of bruised orange, and the air itself crackling with static. "My kid's in a shelter in D.C., Carter said, his voice muffled by a makeshift mask, layers of cloth dipped in a lead solution, a recipe borrowed from 19th century miners. Haven't heard from him in 12 hours. They passed a schoolyard where a swing set swayed gently in the wind, its chains rusted solid. How many children would never laugh here again? Elena wondered, blinking back tears. In the shelter's medical bay, Sarah, the nurse, was a woman on the edge of breaking. She'd used the last of the antiseptic wipes on a young boy with a compound fracture, his skin already showing signs of radiation-induced necrosis. "His body's eating itself," she whispered to Elena, her hands trembling as she wrapped the wound in rags. "We're out of morphine, too. All we can do is hold their hands." On the next cot, a mother rocked her infant, who'd stopped crying hours ago. "She's too weak to even scream," the mother said, staring blankly at the wall. How many more would join the growing list in the morgue tunnel? Jack's worst fear became reality at Diablo Canyon. Despite the heroic efforts of technicians, some of whom had collapsed from heat exhaustion while cranking seawater pumps, the spent fuel pools continued to overheat. At 1400 hours, the first fuel rod breached the surface, its ceramic cladding cracking to release a plume of radioactive steam. "It's a Chernobyl-level event," the plant manager reported, his voice calm only in the way of someone who's accepted death. "Evacuate everyone within 200 miles. The news spread like wildfire, sending millions along the California coast into a panicked exodus, on foot, on horseback, even on bicycles, all fleeing the invisible god of death creeping toward them. In the Arctic, the team at Svalbard worked by the dim light of solar-powered lanterns, their breath frosting on the cold air as they carried seed canisters deeper into the permafrost. Tunnel Charlie's temperature is minus 12 degrees Celsius, Dr. Mikhailov reported, his gloved hand slipping on a frozen metal latch. Wheat seed degrade at minus 10 degrees Celsius. We're losing them now. Outside, the northern lights burn brighter than ever, their green and purple ribbons dancing over a world that no longer deserves such beauty. Elena received Jack's message via a pigeon named Hope, its leg band bent but intact. The note, scrawled to what looked like dried blood, though she hoped it was ink, read, "Second flare arrives at 06:00. Deep shelter has 12 hours of air. Find a map in my locker. Route to Greenland." She clutched the paper to her chest, ignoring the way Lily's eyes widened at the fear in her face. "Daddy's sending us a present," she lied, forcing a smile. A map to a safe place. The shelter's deepest level was a labyrinth of Cold War-era corridors, each door marked with fading signs. Fallout shelter, emergency oxygen, NO unauthorized personnel. Families huddled together, sharing the last of their water, now flavored with iodine to kill radiation-borne bacteria, while a group of teenagers played a silent game of cards, their faces grave. Somewhere, a man tuned a battered guitar, plucking the strings to play Amazing Grace, the notes echoing hollowly in the enclosed space. The survival probability, now a dim red glow on a flickering screen, 15%. Jack, meanwhile, was en route to the salt vault in Kansas, riding shotgun in an M35 truck loaded with lead-line cases containing humanity's genetic legacy. "We got 300 genomes," he told the driver, a former trucker named Jules. "Every ethnicity, every blood type. If we can get them to Greenland." His voice trailed off. Jules nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the first hints of the second flare were already visible, a faint, unnatural shimmer that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. In the shelter, Elena helped Lily into a makeshift radiation suit. Layers of aluminum foil taped to a jumpsuit scavenged from a mechanic's shop. "It'll keep the bad rays out," she said, fastening the final strap. Lily nodded, though her bottom lip trembled. "Will it keep Daddy out too?" she asked, hugging her stuffed penguin tightly. Elena didn't answer, instead pressing a kiss to the girl's forehead and praying the steel doors would hold. At 5:50, the first tremors began, a low, subsonic rumble that vibrated in the bones, more felt than heard. The LED lights flickered, then died, plunging the shelter into darkness save for the dim glow of chemical lights. Somewhere a child screamed. Somewhere a woman sobbed. And in the silence, Elena held Lily close, counting the seconds until the end, wondering if Jack was out there, somewhere, counting too. Survival probability, 10%. The sky outside began to glow, not with the warm light of sunrise, but with a searing, unnatural brilliance, as if a second sun had erupted in the constellation Centaurus. The final act was about to begin, and all they could do was wait and hope that, against all odds, humanity might find a way to survive, to endure, to prove that even in the face of cosmic annihilation, life was worth fighting for. The countdown reached 0. Chapter 5. The Second Dawn. The second flare struck with the subtlety of a supernova, a tsunami of radiation preceded by a split-second hum in the Earth's bones. At precisely 6 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, the magnetic field spasmed like a live wire, inducing currents so violent they turned high-voltage transformers into molten slag within milliseconds. In the Maryland shelter's deepest bunker, Elena's molars ached from the electromagnetic pressure, her hair standing rigid, as if she grabbed a live rail. Lily's scream was a raw, animal sound, her penguin plushie tumbling from her grasp as the world outside dissolved into a white-hot migraine, a brilliance so intense it seeped through concrete, painting their shadows onto the far wall like X-rays. "Get down!" Elena roared, tackling Lily to the gravel-strewn floor just as emergency LED strips exploded in cascades of sparks. Her Geiger counter, clamped to her belt, was a banshee now, its clicks merging into a solid, teeth-rattling shriek. 15.7 sieverts and climbing, the display blurring into an angry red smear. Above ground, the ionosphere was a roiling cauldron of plasma, its collapse triggering a celestial rain of charged particles that sizzled through the stratosphere, leaving contrails of violet fire in their wake. Jack saw it coming through the M35 truck's cracked windshield, a horizon-spanning fissure light, not white or yellow, but neon blue that didn't belong to Earth. "Jules!" he shouted, but the driver was already convulsing, her knuckles white around the steering wheel as induced currents arced between metal surfaces. The truck fishtailed on the irradiated asphalt, its diesel engine stuttering before dying entirely, and Jack was thrown into the dashboard as they careened into a ditch. The genetic archive cases, stolen from the Smithsonian's cryovaults just days prior, slammed into the cab, their lead latches groaning under the flux. He could feel the DNA inside frying, the delicate double helices unspooling like burnt spaghetti. In the shelter, the steel blast doors buckled like aluminum foil, their rubber seals melting into sticky black puddles. Radiation leaked in not as a mist, but as a physical force, a hot, metallic wind that stripped the paint from the walls. Sarah, the nurse who'd once joked about surviving on coffee and spite, crumbled to her knees, retching blood-flecked bile, her body's desperate, final attempt to purge a dose that had already shredded her bone marrow. Elena dragged Lily by the arm, her boots slipping on the suddenly oily concrete, toward the oxygen chamber, a coffin-sized steel box bolted to the floor. "Breathe through your shirt, baby," she gasped, as the first wave of nausea hit her like a sledgehammer. For sieverts in 90 seconds, the limit of human survivability. The atmosphere, already a wounded giant, suffered a mortal blow. The ozone layer, reduced to tatters by the first flare, was now a memory, and the sun's UVB rays poured down like liquid glass. In the Sahara, sand dunes shimmered at 60 degrees Celsius, camels collapsing their tracks with brains fried by heat and radiation. In Alaska, the permafrost moaned as it melted, releasing bubbles of methane that ignited with soft, deadly pops, painting the sky with brief blue flames. Migratory birds, what little remained, fell from the air in mid-flight, their magnetic receptors fried, their tiny hearts stopping mid-beat. Diablo Canyon became a glowing tomb. The spent fuel pools, now boiling away the last of their seawater, exposed rods that pulsed with Cherenkov radiation, a haunting, otherworldly blue that lit up the California coast like a neon graveyard. The containment building cracked from the heat, releasing a plume of radioactive steam that hugged the ground, creeping eastward like a silent reaper. In Tokyo, elderly survivors huddled in the Ginza subway, their homemade filters, coffee ground in pantyhose, doing nothing to stop the iodine, 131 isotopes invading their lungs. This is how civilizations end, Elena thought dully, fumbling with the oxygen chamber's rusted latch. Not with a bang, but with a wheeze. Under the Arctic's ice cap, the Svalbard team worked by the light of dying lanterns. Dr. Mikhailov, his beard frosted with permafrost, pried open a steel canister of fine wheat seeds turned brown and brittle. Dehydrated, their genetic code scrambled like a bad hard drive. "We could have saved them," he muttered, slamming the lid shut as the ice above groaned with the weight of melting glaciers. The northern lights, now a sickly greenish yellow, danced mockingly through the ice fissures, as if the universe itself were celebrating. In the shelter's oxygen chamber, the air was thick with a coppery tang of blood. Elena's nosebleed had become a steady drip, staining her shirt in dark blossoms. Lily's forehead was a furnace under a palm, her once bright eyes now glassy, pupils dilated from pain. "Remember our trip to the beach, baby?" Elena whispered, pressing a damp cloth, scavenged from a first aid kit, now reeking of iodine, to the child's cheek. "The way the waves tickled your toes." Lily managed a faint nod, her lips moving soundlessly, a ghost of a smile, the last flicker of a life about to be extinguished. Above ground, the electromagnetic chaos was a symphony of destruction. Steel girders in Chicago's skyscrapers hummed with induced currents, their joints expanding until they snapped with gunshot cracks. In Houston, the Astrodome's roof collapsed under the heat, its plastic panels melting into a tarry mess. The only sound was the pop-pop of exploding transformers, the distant roar of wildfires, and the occasional, heart-wrenching whimper of a dying animal. Though even those were fading now. Jack clawed his way out of the truck cab, his ears ringing from the EMP's subsonic roar. Jules's body was still there, her hands fused to the wheel by welded skin and metal, her eyes open but unseeing. He dragged the genetic archive cases, now scratched and dented but still closed, into a shallow culvert, using his own body as a shield. The second wave of charged particles hit, like a freight train, his dosimeter spiking to 8.3 sieverts before the display died. He could taste metal in his mouth, his vision blurring at the edges, but he stared at the cases anyway. 300 genomes, each a story, a legacy, a hope. Is this how it ends? He wondered, as his legs gave out, the Kansas dirt warm against his cheek. Buried in a ditch, with the sum of humanity's DNA for company? In the Maryland shelter, the oxygen gauge ticked to zero with a soft click. Elena opened the chamber door, met with a wall of heat that seared her throat. The main shelter was a morgue. Bodies sprawled in unnatural poses, their skin blistered and peeling, blood pooling around noses and ears. She carried Lily to a small storage room, stacking canned goods against the door, a futile barrier, but human instinct, and settled onto the cold floor. The child's breathing was shallow now, her chest rising and falling in quick, bird-like gasps. "I love you, Lily Bug," Elena whispered, kissing her hair, which was already starting to fall out in clumps. "You were the best thing I ever did." Lily's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment clarity returned. "Mommy," she said, voice tiny, "the stars are so close." Then her gaze fixed on something beyond, and her body went limp. Elena held her for a long time, listening to the distant, muffled boom of a transformer exploding, feeling the shelter's walls tremble as the earth itself seemed to sigh. Somewhere, for 0.2 light-years away, Proxima Centauri flickered, its violent outburst finally subsiding. But here on Earth, the second dawn was a lie. There would be no new day, no rebirth, only silence and the slow, inevitable march of radiation sickness, and the knowledge that humanity's greatest achievement had been surviving as long as it had. The survival probability, now irrelevant, was a silent echo in a dead world. And in the shelter's pitch-black darkness, Elena closed her eyes and let the silence take her. Chapter 6. The Long Night. The first week after the second flare was a study in silence. On a planet that had once buzzed with 7 billion heartbeats, the only sounds were the whine of dying generators, the drip-drip of radioactive rain, and the occasional, haunting howl of wind through empty cities. Across the northern hemisphere, the surface was a sterilized wasteland, its soil irradiated to levels that would render it uninhabitable for 10,000 years, a sentence written in sieverts, as a surviving scientist put it. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the British Antarctic Survey's subglacial base hummed with the steady thrum of 1980s-era diesel generators. Dr. Anna Marquez, no relation to Elena, though she would later wonder about the coincidence, stared at the base's last functional monitor, which displayed a satellite image in the northern hemisphere, a vast expanse of gray, interrupted only by the glowing blue scars of nuclear meltdowns. "It's a neutron bomb without the blast," she muttered, her breath visible in the minus 40 degrees Celsius air. The base housed 32 survivors, scientists, engineers, and 2 logistics personnel who'd been delivering supplies when the flares hit. They subsisted on a diet of freeze-dried rations and meltwater filtered through layers of gravel and charcoal, primitive, but effective against most radiation particulates, according to the base's chief engineer, Sergei. But even their meager supplies were dwindling. The generators consumed 50 liters of diesel daily, and the fuel reserve would last just 89 more days. In the med bay, a young researcher named Liwei lay unconscious, his skin covered in radiation dermatitis. Angry, weeping sores that ooze a clear fluid. 2.7 sieverts cumulative, the base's sole nurse, Maria, reported, checking his fading pulse. His bone marrow shot. "We can't even give him platelets. We don't have the equipment." They'd already lost 3 survivors to acute radiation syndrome, their bodies breaking down in textbook fashion. Nausea, hair loss, organ failure. The Bayer 7 report had predicted this. Anna thought numbly, but numbers on a page didn't prepare you for the smell of burning flesh. 3,000 miles north in the Pacific Ocean's Mariana Trench, the USS Ohio, a decommissioned ballistic missile submarine converted to a research vessel, prowled the depths. Captain Rachel Cortez monitored the sub's radiation sensors, which showed a 40% spike in seawater radioactivity since the flares. "The surface is a graveyard," she told her crew of 18, her voice steady but weary. "We're the only ones left who can go topside for now." The Ohio's nuclear reactor, designed to run for 30 years without refueling, still hummed efficiently, providing power for life support and desalination. But even here, 2,000 feet below the surface, they weren't safe. The flares had disrupted marine ecosystems, and the once teeming bioluminescent life outside their portholes was now scarce, replaced by ghostly, mutated fish with opaque eyes and misshapen fins. The food chain collapsed, marine biologist Dr. Patel said, staring at a dead squid drifting past. No plankton, no krill, no fish. We're looking at a marine mass extinction. On the surface, a small team of survivors in Greenland, former employees of the Thule Air Base, had fortified an underground bunker using supplies scavenged from a nearby Inuit village. Their leader, Eric, a former mechanic, had jury-rigged a wind turbine from a crashed helicopter, providing enough power to run a single heater and a shortwave radio. "We'd pick up whispers sometimes," he told his daughter, Inu, as they sorted through cans of irradiated spam. "Antarctica may be a sub in the Atlantic, but no one's coming to save us." Inu, 12 years old and already showing early signs of radiation sickness, a persistent cough, nosebleeds, nodded solemnly. She'd seen the world end twice. First when the lights went out, then when the second flare turned the sky into a weapon. Now she drew pictures in the dirt. Smiling families, green trees, a blue sky, remembrances of a world her children would never know. Back in Antarctica, Anna's team made a grim discovery. The base's geothermal heat exchanger, their only source of warmth, was failing. The volcanic activity beneath the ice had shifted, and the water temperature feeding their radiators had dropped by 5 degrees Celsius in 24 hours. "We switched to emergency heaters," Sergei said, "but that'll burn through diesel twice as fast." Anna stared at the fuel gauge. 89 days became 45. A month and a half, she thought, before we freeze or suffocate. The moral toll was as deadly as the physical. In the mess hall, arguments broke out over ration portions. In the sleeping quarters, whispers turned to blame. Why did we save the seed vault instead of people? No one had an answer. Anna found solace in the base's library, a dusty collection of books on glaciology and philosophy. She often reread a passage from Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change. Understatement, she thought, running a hand over the radiation burn on her forearm. In the USS Ohio, Rachel faced a mutiny threat. A young crewman, Johnson, demanded they surface to look for his family in California, now a radioactive exclusion zone. "They could be alive," he shouted, gripping a wrench like a weapon. Rachel disarmed him calmly, but not before he damaged a desalination pump. "Surface exposure would kill you in 12 hours, she said, bandaging his hand. "I'm not letting you die for a ghost." The sub's medical bay held a small cache of potassium iodide and antibiotics, but even those were running low. Dr. Patel, treating a crew member with radiation-induced cataracts, shook his head. "We're out of sterile dressings. Next infection could kill us." On the 10-day post-flare, the Antarctic base's radio crackled to life, a faint, garbled signal from Greenland. "This is Eric, Thule Base. Does anyone copy?" Anna grabbed the microphone, her hand shaking. "Thule, this is Antarctic Base Delta. We read you weak but clear. How many survivors?" The reply came after a long pause. 12. "You?" 32. "But we're losing heat and fuel." Another pause, and "We're all losing something. Document. We're all losing everything." That night, Anna stared at the base's supply manifest, her breath fogging the clipboard. They could attempt a surface mission to retrieve fuel from a nearby research station. 50 miles through minus 60 degrees Celsius temperatures, irradiated snow, and no guarantee the fuel hadn't frozen or leaked. The risk was suicidal. But the alternative was certain death. She thought of the Svalbard seed vault, now likely destroyed, and Jack's genetic archives buried in a Kansas ditch. We saved the code, she thought. But what good is a code without someone to read it? In the end, it wasn't a vote or a debate that decided them. It was the sight of Li Wei's body being zipped into a plastic tarp, The fourth casualty. That galvanized the team. "We go tomorrow," Anna said, clapping Sergei on the shoulder. "We bring back fuel, or we don't come back at all." Above them, the Antarctic sky, untouched by the flare's worst effects, twinkled with stars, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Proxima Centauri, the tiny red that had ended a world, was invisible from this latitude, but its legacy lived on in the radiation in their bones, the silence in their radios, and the knowledge that home was now a planet that no longer existed. The survival probability, uncalculated but understood, hovered at 3%, a statistic as cold and unforgiving as the ice surrounding them. And so the long night began, a vigil of science and desperation, where every breath was a rebellion and every heartbeat a miracle. Chapter 7. The Ice Road. The Antarctic surface was a nightmare of white on white, its deceptive beauty hiding a deadly truth. Every breath of minus 60 degrees Celsius air carried radioactive particulates. Every step risked punching through thin ice into freezing seawater below. Anna Marquez zipped her thermal suit to the chin, double-checking the seals on her gas mask, a relic from the base's 1990s emergency cache, rated for 12 hours of surface exposure. Beside her, Sergei hefted a manual ice auger, its metal parts already frosting over with sub-zero condensation. "Stay within visual range," she shouted over the howling katabatic wind, her voice muffled by the mask's filter. The team of 4, Anna, Sergei, Maria the nurse, and young engineer Raj, had volunteered for fuel run, leaving the rest of the base huddled around a single electric heater that flickered like a dying star. Their target, the abandoned Russian Vostok station, 52 miles north, where 200 liters of diesel might still sit in above-ground tanks, if the cold hadn't turned it to wax. Anna squinted at the GPS unit, a pre-EMP handheld with a crack screen that flickered between coordinates and static. The journey was a crawl. Their snowmobile, a 2005 Bombardier Outlander, sputtered like a dying animal, its engine choking on irradiated oil thickened by cold. Raj, riding shotgun, monitored the dosimeter, 0.8 sieverts/hour, twice the base's safety threshold. "We're blowing through a lifetime dose in minutes," he shouted, though his tone was flat. Fear had long since calcified into pragmatism. 3 hours in, Maria collapsed. Her gas mask seal had failed, exposing her to raw Antarctic air laced with plutonium, 239 from Diablo Canyon's meltdown. "I can't feel my hands," she gasped, lips turning blue, frostbite already nibbling at her cheeks. Anna knelt, pressing a chemical heat pack to her neck, but the math was merciless. Hypothermia plus 1.5 sieverts acute exposure equals irreversible organ failure. "Go," Maria whispered, pushing Anna's hand away with a strength that belied her collapse. "Save the fuel for the kids." Sergei slung her body over the snowmobile's rear rack, strapping it down without a word. Burying the dead was a luxury of warmer worlds. Here, every minute was a battle against the clock. By nightfall, they'd covered 30 miles, whiteout conditions reducing the world to a featureless void. Anna activated the emergency beacon, a 1980s-era radio transponder, praying its VLF signal could pierce the ionospheric static. 2,000 feet below the Pacific, the USS Ohio faced a new crisis. The desalination pump, damaged during Johnson's mutiny, leaked brine into the reactor compartment. Captain Rachel Cortez wrenched a valve tight, gloves slippery with salt water. 30% capacity left, she told Dr. Patel, who analyzed water samples spiked with cesium-137. "At this rate, we'll run dry in 72 hours. The sub's galley was a tomb of silence. Crew members picked at rehydrated beans, their last uncontaminated rations, staring at empty aquaculture tanks where tilapia had died weeks prior, their scales sloughing off in the radioactive broth. "We have to surface for parts," Patel said, though everyone knew surface exposure meant 12 hours tops before radiation poisoning set in, or start rationing at half a liter per day. In Greenland, Eric tuned the shortwave radio, chasing a faint Morse code pulse. SOS, the universal cry for help. Antarctic base Delta, do you copy? He repeated, knuckles white on the microphone. Inu sorted through a hunter's medical cache nearby. Expired bandages, a single amoxicillin bottle, duct tape. What if no one's there? She asked, voice trembling. Eric forced a smile. Then we write our own answers, kid. Dawn found Anna's team at Vostok Station. Snowmobile sputtering to a halt beside fuel tanks encased in ice. Sergei chipped at the frozen diesel with the auger, revealing a waxy sludge. Gotta melt it, he said, igniting a propane torch. A risky move in oxygen-starved cold, but desperation had no room for caution. The flame flickered blue, melting the fuel into a murky liquid they funneled into 5-gallon drums. Raj suddenly dropped to his knees, retching blood-tinged bile. His dosimeter read 4.2 sieverts, acute radiation syndrome in full swing. Should have stayed, he gasped, as Sergei loaded the last drum. Anna checked his pupils. Pinpoint unresponsive, and injected the final antiemetic dose. You'll be fine, she lied, knowing his bone marrow was already shutting down. The return trip was a death march. Maria's body was a stiff weight bouncing on the rack. Raj unconscious. Snowmobile engine coughing black smoke. When the first flakes of radioactive snow fell, heavy, metallic smelling, pitch black, Anna knew they wouldn't make it back. She activated the beacon one last time, typing a final message. Fuel acquired. 3 casualties. Coordinates attached. Above them, the Antarctic sky remained eerily clear, Proxima Centauri invisible but omnipresent in every radioactive particle, every frozen breath. Anna stared at the fuel drums, wondering if Maria and Raj's deaths will buy the base an extra month. 32 lives belonged in a world where survival meant outlasting the next failure. On the Ohio, Rachel greenlit a midnight surface mission. Use a 1990s-era Deep Worker 2000 mini-sub to raid a sunken Japanese vessel for pump parts. 10 minutes topside, no exceptions, she ordered, ignoring the crew's pale faces. The mini-sub had no radiation shielding, but hope had become a finite resource. As the sub began its ascent, Dr. Patel examined plankton samples, mutated, translucent, barely clinging to life. The ocean's a graveyard, he murmured, voice lost in the hum of the reactor. We're just the last mourners. In Greenland, Eric's radio crackled to life. Thule, this is... Before cutting out. Inu's eyes lit up, but Eric saw the truth in the static. They were specks in an irradiated universe, holding on not for rescue, but because surrender was the one luxury they couldn't afford. Survival probability. 2%. A number as fragile as the ice beneath Anna's snowmobile, as transient as a last spark in a dead generator. And so they marched on, each step a rebellion against the void, each breath a silent ode to a planet that no longer remembered what it meant to live. Chapter 8. Flicker of Hope. The Antarctic base Delta's airlock ground opened at 3:17. The hydraulic mechanism protesting the cold with metallic shriek. Anna Marquez stumbled inside, her thermal suit crusted with black radioactive snow that crumbled like ash, releasing a faint, acrid odor of burnt electronics. She dragged a fuel drum behind her, the steel rim scraping the ice-lined floor. 35 liters sloshing inside, enough to keep the generators humming for 35 more days. Sergei followed, Raj's frozen body slung over one shoulder. Maria's remained strapped to his back with parachute cord, their suits stiffened into grotesque poses by sub-zero temperatures. Watch the seals. Anna barked as 2 engineers rushed to unload the drums, their gloved hands fumbling with rusted latches. The base's interior was a cacophony of chattering teeth and chugging generators. the air thick with the smell of diesel fumes and antiseptic. Sergei collapsed onto a bench, his visor fogged with a mix of sweat and frost, revealing a face marred by geometric frostbite patterns. The imprinter's gas mask seal, and speckled with petechiae from internal bleeding, 3.1 sieverts. The dosimeter would later log, a death sentence in slow motion. In the med bay, Leeway thrashed on a cot, his fever-induced delirium punctuated by gasps of lichen photosynthesis. Anna paused at his bedside, recalling how he'd once spent 72 hours straight in the cold lab, studying moss samples from McMurdo dry valleys. Now his skin was a patchwork of purplish ecchymosis, each lesion a map of failing capillaries. No platelets, no plasma, no chance, she thought, adjusting the foredrip, just saline, to ease the dehydration that came with radiation sickness. 2,000 feet above, the Deep Worker 2000 broke the surface at 23:59, its exterior lights revealing a sea turned to sludge, oily slicks of radioactive runoff churned with bioluminescent bacteria, mutated into jagged neon green formations. The Hakurii Maru listed to starboard, her hull pocked with corrosion holes that glowed faintly with Cherenka radiation, a ghost ship in a ghost ocean. "Move, move, move," Carter shouted, his voice distorted by the mini-sub's comm system. He and Kim wrestled open a rusted hatch, the air inside reeking of metal and death. The desalination pump module sat in a pool of stagnant water, its casing etched with radiation burns but otherwise intact. As Kim reached for it, his suit's external dosimeter spiked to 5.5 sieverts, plutonium-241, likely from Diablo Canyon's fallout, concentrated in the ship's hull. "Got it," Carter yelled, yanking the module free as Kim collapsed, his gloved hand leaving a bloody smear on the bulkhead. Back in the mini-sub, Kim's breathing grew shallow, his pupils dilated despite the harsh interior lights. "I can see green fields," he murmured, before vomiting black bile into his helmet. Dr. Patel said nothing as he removed Kim's suit, Stage 3 ARS, survival time, for 6 hours, but his jaw tightened at the sight of blisters forming along the young biologist's hairline. In Greenland, Eric pried open a buried wooden crate with a rusted crowbar, the frozen ground protesting with crack like gunfire. Inside, 6 packs of freeze-dried Arctic char, their packaging yellow but intact, and a canvas bag of barley seeds labeled Arctic Gold, radiation-tolerant variety, 2018 trial batch. Inu held a seed between her thumb and forefinger, its husk ridged like a fossil. "Can we plant them, Dad?" she asked, her breath visible in the minus 30 degrees Celsius air. Eric hesitated. Soil radiation levels at Thule were still 0.3 sieverts/week, triple the threshold for germination, but nodded. "Sure, kid, we'll find a way." Their radio, jury-rigged with a solar panel scavenged from a weather station's remains, crackled to life as Inu adjusted the dial. At first, only static. Then a voice, faint but human, speaking in clipped, controlled English. "This is Antarctic-based Delta, broadcasting on 4.7 megahertz. If anyone is listening." Eric snatched the microphone, his knuckles white. "Delta, this is Thule Base, Greenland. We have 12 survivors. Repeat, 12 souls alive." The reply took 12 excruciating seconds, each one a heartbeat in the void. "Thule, this is Delta. 30 of us remain. We have fuel and seeds, radiation-resistant strains." Inu's eyes lit up, a rare smile breaking through her fatigue. "See, Dad? We're not alone." Eric smiled back, but his chest ached. Seeds needed more than genetics. They needed time, and time was the one resource no one had. Back in Antarctica, Anna sorted through the seed bank, a metal cabinet containing 12 glass jars, each labeled with fragile optimism. Potato, Yukon Gold, mutant strain 2019. Barley, Hullis, Radiation tolerance 2.5 sieverts. Lee Wei had annotated each jar in his neat script, unaware that his own tolerance would never exceed 3 sieverts. Anna traced a condensation on a jar containing wheatgrass seeds, wondering if any human would live long enough to see them sprout, or they'd become yet another exhibit in the Museum of Extinct Hopes. On the Ohio, the desalination pump roared back to life at 8 o'clock, spewing fresh water into the tanks with a sputter that felt like a miracle. Carter grinned, showing teeth cracked from the cold, but Rachel's attention stayed on the crew list. 17 names, now 16. Kim had died at 7:45. His last word a whisper of ocean. Ration at 750 milliliters, she ordered, her voice steady, and prepped a mini-sub for another run. We'll hit the Australian research station next. They had a pharmacy. That night, Anna stood in the observatory, her breath fogging the reinforced glass as she stared at Proxima Centauri. It was just another star now, its red hue indistinguishable from the others in the Southern Cross. A star doesn't care, she thought. It just is. But humanity cared, in its stubborn, fragile way. Enu's drawing of 3 figures, Eric's lie about the seeds, even the Ohio's crew continuing their suicidal supply runs. They were all writing a footnote in the universe's indifference, proof that life clung not because it was logical, but because it was life. Survival probability, 1.8%, a decimal point in a cosmic equation. But to those still breathing, it was everything. A flicker, a spark, a reason to refill the generator, to tune the radio, to plant a seed. And so they carried on not toward a future, but into the now, where every hour was a victory, every connection a miracle, and hope, however faint, refused to be extinguished. Chapter 9. Fractured Connections. The radio in Antarctic base Delta crackled to life at 11 o'clock sharp, a miracle of static and persistence. Anna Marquez lunged a microphone, nearly knocking over a jar of irradiated barley seeds. "Thule, this is Delta, do you copy?" she shouted, her voice echoing the cramped comms room. For 90 seconds, only white noise answered, until a faint, garbled voice emerged. Delta seeds germination rate, 12%. Eric's message, transmitted from Greenland via 1940s-era shortwave radio jury-rigged with a satellite dish scavenged from a downed weather balloon, was a lifeline. Anna scribbled the data on a frost-covered clipboard. Arctic gold barley, 0.2 sieverts/week. Cotyledons deformed, root growth stunted. It matched her own trials with Lee Wei's mutant potatoes. 2.5 sieverts tolerance on paper, but real-world radiation combined with nutrient deprivation turned seedlings into twisted husks. 2 decks below, the base's generator sputtered, its diesel engine coughing black smoke into ventilation system. Sergei, now confined to a wheelchair due to radiation-induced neuropathy, hammered a loose valve with a rubber mallet. 30 liters left, he called to Anna, his words punctuated by the machine's death rattle. Enough for 22 days if we cut heat to 10 degrees Celsius. Anna nodded, ignoring the chill that had settled in her bones. 10 degrees Celsius was borderline hypothermia for 30 people, but necessary to stretch fuel. In the Pacific depths, the USS Ohio glided toward the Australian coast, its sonar pinging a maze of collapsed underwater ridges. Tectonic activities worse than pre-flare, Dr. Patel noted, studying a cracked nautical chart. The 2021 Tonga eruption weakened these plates. Now the flares are finishing the job. Rachel Cortez gripped the periscope, watching as a wall of silk collapsed, temporarily blinding the sub-sensors. "Keep us at 1,500 feet, she ordered, "and pray the hull holds." Their target, the Australian Antarctic Division's Mawson Station, now a submerged tomb. The mini-sub, Deep Worker 2000, had suffered a cracked viewport during the last mission. Its acrylic glass spiderweb with stress fractures, a flaw in 1990s-era composite materials. Carter, the engineer, had grumbled, but their only option for surface excursions. Inside the sub, 2 crew members loaded a net with lead-line canisters, destined for the station's pharmacy, if it hadn't been crushed by tectonic shifts. In Greenland, Eric and Inu huddled over a makeshift grow bed, a plastic tub filled with melted glacial water and sterilized vermiculite. 3 barley seedlings struggling toward a UV lamp cobbled from a tanning bed's remains. Their roots are turning brown, Inu said, prodding a seedling gently. Eric checked the Geiger counter clipped to the tub. 0.15 sieverts/day, still 50% above the 2018 FAO recommended limit for agriculture. They're adapting, he lied, though the seedling's stunted growth mirrored the hopelessness in his chest. Back in Antarctica, Anna visited Li Wei's cold lab for the first time since his death. Frost coated the freezers, but one drawer hummed faintly, powered by a solar panel jury rigged to the roof. Inside, she found petri dishes containing lichen samples labeled McMurdo Dry Valleys. Strain 4 to 8 sieverts tolerance. The lichen, a symbiosis of fungus and algae, had survived in irradiated water for 17 days post-flare, its chlorophyll molecules warped but functional. Natural radiation adaptation, Li Wei's final note read. Could this be the key? Anna took a sample to Med Bay, where 3 survivors now suffer from radiation-induced anemia. She ground the lichen into a paste, mixing it with melted snow, a desperate experiment. No peer review, no safety data. It's either this or wait for death, she told skeptical nurse, her voice steady despite the gamble. The patient swallowed the paste, coughing violently, but by nightfall, his platelet count had stabilized. A fluke or a miracle? On the Ohio, the mini-sub reached Mawson Station's remains, its floodlights revealing a nightmare. The station had folded on itself, metal beams twisted like taffy by the seafloor's shifting. No access, Carter reported, his voice tight. Pharmacies under 50 tons of steel. Rachel slammed a fist against the control panel. No antibiotics. No way to treat the crew's growing infections. Then the sonar pinged again, louder. A new underwater landslide, heading straight for them. Emergency dive, she shouted, as the sub lurched sideways, silt scraping at hull like 1,000 knives. The cracked viewport groaned under pressure, a thin stream of seawater leaking in radioactive cesium. 137 levels off the charts. Carter scrambled to seal the breach, while Dr. Patel braced himself against the bulkhead, wondering if this was how it ended. Crushed by the ocean, irradiated into nothing, a footnote in a drowned world. In Greenland, the radio crackled again, but this time it was static, ionospheric disturbance, predicted by the 2024 NOAA space weather models. Inu stared at the silent device, her shoulders slumping. They're gone, aren't they? She asked. Eric pulled her close, feeling her fragile frame shake. No, kid, just on a long call. Sometimes the stars get in the way. That night, Anna stared at the seed bank's meager stock, her breath visible in the unheated lab. The lichen experiment had bought them days, not weeks, and the generator's cough grew weaker by the hour. Outside, the Antarctic wind howled, carrying with the faint, metallic tang of ozone, a relic of the flares, a reminder that the atmosphere would never be whole again. Survival probability, 1.7%, a number that felt like a taunt now. As connections fractured, supplies dwindled, and the last embers of hope sputtered like a dying generator. But in the cold, dark corners of the planet, humanity persisted, measuring their progress in millimeters of seed growth, seconds of radio contact, and the stubborn refusal to let the universe have the final word. And somewhere in the silence between stars, Proxima Centauri flickered, indifferent, as it had for billions of years. But here on Earth, life's quiet rebellion continued, fractured, fragile, but unbroken. Chapter 10, The Last Harvest. The grow bed in Thule base glowed under UV lights, 3 barley seedlings casting fragile shadows on the concrete wall. Inu knelt beside the plastic tub, her breath misting the protective plexiglass shield Eric had scavenged from a crashed drone. Roots grew 2 millimeters overnight, she reported, her voice cautious but hopeful. Eric squinted at a Geiger counter. 0.14 sieverts/day, still double the pre-flare safety limit, but the lowest they'd achieved by lining the tub with lead sheets from a dismantled X-ray machine. Thin stems, though, he said, pointing to the seedlings' bent stalks. They're stretching for light that isn't strong enough. The UV lamp, repurposed from a tanning salon, emitted a faint purple glow, nowhere near the spectrum needed for photosynthesis, but it was all they had. Inu nodded, scribbling notes in a waterproof journal, salvaged from a fisherman's cabin, her handwriting steady despite the tremor in her fingers, a leftover from the radiation-induced neuropathy diagnosed last week. 3,000 miles south, Antarctic base Delta's generator sputtered to a halt at 4 o'clock, its diesel tank bone dry. Anna Marquez jolted awake in her sleeping bag, teeth chattering from the sudden cold. 10 degrees Celsius had felt balmy compared to the minus 20 degrees Celsius now seeping through the walls. "Fire up the coal heater," she told Sergei, who'd already begun piling black lumps into the 1970s-era stove. The air soon filled with the acrid smell of burning sulfur, a byproduct of impurities in the coal, toxic, but warmer than death. Coal reserves last for 14 days, Sergei said, coughing into his fist. After that, his voice trailed off, eyes lingering on the seed bank. Anna didn't need him to finish. Without heat, the seeds would freeze, the survivors would follow. She turned to the lichen experiment instead, now in its 5th day. 2 patients showed improved platelet counts, while the 3rd had developed a violent cough, radiation pneumonitis, or a reaction to the lichen's alkaloids. No way to know without a lab, just like there was no way to know if Li Wei's key was a breakthrough or a placebo. In the Pacific, the USS Ohio hovered at 1,800 feet, its reactor humming a steady tune while the crew debated the next move. "Arctic ice is thinning," Dr. Patel said, sliding a cracked satellite image across the table. 2023 models showed a 30% reduction in multi-year ice. Now it's 70%. Rachel Cortez studied the map, her finger tracing the route to Thule base. "We can make it through the Fram Strait," she said, "but at periscope depth. Any collision with packed ice could breach the hull." Carter, the engineer, snorted. "Hull's already breached. Did you forget the crack viewport?" He gestured to the mini-sub, now confined to the launch bay. Its acrylic glass spiderweb with new fractures from the Australian mission. "We're sitting ducks up there." But Rachel's gaze didn't waver. The crew had 11 infections running rampant, and the last antibiotic dose will be gone in 72 hours. "Thule has seeds," she said, "and maybe a way to filter radiation from seawater. We need both." Back in Greenland, Eric pried open a metal canister labeled MRE Vegetarian 2019, the last of their non-irradiated rations. The smell of lentil stew filled the bunker, but Inu wrinkled her nose. "It tastes like lead," she said, pushing the tray away. Eric didn't argue. He'd vomited twice after the last meal, his body rejecting even the low-dose radiation in the food. Instead, he turned to the radio, now silent for 48 hours, ionospheric storms or Delta base gone dark. In Antarctica, Anna led a team to the abandoned Russian Vostok station, a 50-mile trek through Sastrugi, wind-sculpted ice formations that sliced through their thermal suits. "Temperatures at minus 55 degrees Celsius," she shouted over the howling wind, her voice muffled by a gas mask filtered with activated charcoal, a desperate upgrade from the 1990s gear. The station loomed ahead, a rusted skeleton buried in ice, its emergency depot rumored to hold 100 liters of aviation fuel, frozen but burnable with enough heat. Inside Vostok's supply shed, they found more than fuel, a crate of Soviet-era lead-line suits, their rubber seals cracked but reparable with duct tape. 1960s technology, Anna muttered, running a gloved hand over the coarse fabric. Better than nothing. But the real prize was a hand-cranked generator, buried under a snowdrift. 1950s design, all mechanical, no semiconductors to fry. "We'll get it working," she told her team, ignoring the dosimeter's steady climb. 0.3 sieverts and rising. The price of hope. On the Ohio. The crew voted at 2100 hours, their voices echoing in the mess hall. All those in favor of heading north, raise a hand. Rachel counted 10 votes, against 7 opposed. "Decision made," she said, though her stomach churned. The Fram Strait was a gauntlet of shifting ice and radioactive runoff, but it was their last chance to link up with Thule survivors. Dive to 500 feet, propeller speed 15 knots. We'll hug the seafloor until we hit Arctic waters. That night, Enu dreamed of green fields, a memory borrowed from picture books. She woke to find Eric staring at the grow bed, his face lit by the UV lamp's purple haze. "What if we're the last ones, Dad?" she asked, her voice small. He turned, and in the dim light, she saw tears on his cheeks, the first she'd seen since the flares. "Then we'll plant every seed," he said, "and teach our kids to plant theirs, even if it takes 1,000 years." In Antarctica, Anna fired up the Vostok generator. Its engine coughed into life with a sound like distant thunder. Fuel poured into Delta Base's tanks, enough for 18 days, but the real victory was the lead suits, 12 of them patched and stinking of mothballs, but functional. "We can expand the scavenging radius," she told Sergei, who'd insisted on coming despite his wheelchair. "Maybe even reach the old American McMurdo station." He nodded, but his eyes were on the seed bank. 11 jars left, including Li Wei's lichen strain, now showing faint green shoots in irradiated soil. Survival probability, 1.9%, a marginal uptick, bought with coal fumes and cracked suits, but hope now had a shape. 3 barley seedlings in Greenland, a sputtering generator in Antarctica, a nuclear submarine plowing north through irradiated ice. They were not building a future. They were stitching together a present, 1 millimeter of seed growth, 1 liter of fuel, 1 second of radio contact at a time. And above them, the stars watched, Proxima Centauri among them, indifferent to the fragile rebellion unfolding on a planet half dead, but unable to quench the one thing it had never understood: the stubborn, irrational, unyielding will to survive. That night, the 3 groups, Antarctica, Greenland, Pacific, shared a radio call, their voices overlapping in static and hope. "We have 61 seed jars," Anna said, "and a way to grow them in low radiation." Eric added, "Thule soil is stabilizing, 0.1 sieverts/day now, thanks to volcanic ash from the 2022 Iceland eruption." Rachel's voice, tired but triumphant, cut through. "Ohio's reactor is holding, and we have enough desalination parts to last a year. We'll start growing spirulina tomorrow, first real food in months." But victory was ephemeral. In the Indian Ocean, a new solar flare erupted, its radiation wave frying satellite remnants and knocking out the Ohio's comms. In Thule, the grow bed's UV lamp shorted out, the barley seedlings wilting under the dim Arctic sun. In Delta Base, a generator fire claimed 2 lives, their screams lost in the howling wind. The survivors mourned, but they didn't falter. Anna's team rigged a wind turbine from McMurdo scraps, using the station's old anemometer to calculate wind patterns. Eric fashioned a new UV lamp from car headlights, scavenged from a buried truck. Rachel diverted the Ohio to a seamount with geothermal vents, using the heat to warm the sub and accelerate algae growth. Survival probability, 2%. A step back, a reminder that hope was not a ladder, but a tightrope. Yet in the ashes they rebuilt, each day a battle, each connection a lifeline. The lichen spread to Antarctica's ice caves, a green stain on the white wasteland, slowly absorbing radiation. The barley in Thule, though stunted, had flowered, its pollen carried by wind to unknown corners, a silent promise of future growth. And so they carried on, as Proxima Centauri's light, constant, indifferent, illuminated a world where humanity, though battered, refused to vanish. The final chapter would not be an end, but a beginning, a legacy etched in seeds, radiation-resistant genes, and the unbroken chain of survival. Each small victory, each moment of connection, was a testament to their resolve, proof that even in the face of cosmic indifference, life would find a way. Chapter 11. Ephemeral Victory. The USS Ohio creaked through the Fram Strait, its hull scraping against ice floes that glowed faintly with Cherenkov radiation. Plutonium-239 runoff from pre-flare nuclear waste dumps. Rachel Cortez gripped the periscope, watching as a chunk of ice the size of a house shattered against a conning tower. Depth to seafloor, 300 feet, she barked. Maintain course. Below, the crew held their breath, each shudder of the hull a reminder of how close they were to disaster. The sub-sonar pinged irregularly, mapping a labyrinth of underwater ridges formed by post-flare tectonic upheaval, a landscape unrecognizable from pre-flare charts, as if the ocean floor itself had rewritten its history. In the mess hall, Dr. Patel checked the last vial of antibiotics, now down to 3 doses. "If we don't reach Thule in 48 hours, he said, we lose 3 more, maybe more. Carter, nursing a cracked rib from the Australian mission, grunted. "We'll make it. Those Greenlanders have to have something, even if it's just hope." But hope was a luxury. The sub's oxygen scrubbers were failing, CO2 levels climbing past safe limits. The air grew thick with tension, each breath a reminder of their fragile hold on survival. In Thule Base, Inu pressed her ear to the radio, listening for the faint hum of the Ohio's reactor. "Dad, I hear something, like a whale song, but mechanical." Eric adjusted the antenna, his hands trembling. "It's them," he whispered, as the radio crackled to life. "Thule, this is Ohio. We're 20 miles out, surface ice too thick. Prepare for underwater docking." The pair scrambled to activate the base's ancient underwater docking system, a 1980s-era contraption, last used for research submersibles. Inu's fingers flew over the control panel, her training on vintage video games proving unexpectedly useful as she jury-rigged the system to life. Anna Marquez's team reached McMurdo Station at dawn, their lead suits heavy with ice. The station's hangar yawned open, revealing crates of 2015-era radiation-hardened seeds, wheat, triticum durum, 5 sieverts tolerance, and a cache of solar panels, still wrapped in plastic. "Jackpot," Sergei said, his voice muffled by the mask, as he loaded a sled with 50 seed jars. Back at Delta Base, the seed bank now held 61 jars, a fragile archive of humanity's agricultural past. Anna's team also discovered a weathered journal in the station's office, its pages filled with notes from a 2019 researcher. Tried growing kale in 0.3 sieverts. Stems mutated, but edible. Maybe a path forward. The words, though faded, ignited a spark of possibility. On the Ohio, the crew donned hazmat suits and entered Thule's underwater airlock, their Geiger counters screaming. 0.8 sieverts, a single exposure limit. Eric met them, his face gaunt but resolute. "Antibiotics," Rachel said, handing over a lead box, "and we need your seed filtration data." Inu passed a thumb drive. "Barley, 0.1 sieverts / day filtration using volcanic ash. 2024 Inuit Survival Manual." The data, compiled from generations of Arctic survival knowledge, offered a blueprint for low-radiation agriculture. something the Ohio's crew could use to grow algae and fungi in their sub's hydroponic tanks. In Antarctica, the lichen paste had become a daily ritual, the greenish sludge administered to all survivors. Leeway's lab now buzzed with activity, as Anna's team isolated a protein from the lichen N4, binds to radiation-damaged DNA. A discovery that might, in time, reduce cell death. The survival probability climbed to 2.2%, a number that now felt less like a statistic and more like a promise. Sergei, despite his deteriorating health, spent hours poring over Leeway's notes, his mind sharp despite the neuropathy. "We can scale this," he said, pointing to a diagram of lichen colonies. "Create a bioreactor for mass production." Chapter 12. Legacy. In the heart of Thule Base, Inu labored through the night, her body racked with pain, while Eric monitored the birthing suite's radiation shields. The lead line room, a jury-rigged creation from scavenged X-ray equipment, hummed with the low drone of a dehumidifier, a necessity to prevent mold in the frigid, sealed space. When Lyra's cries finally pierced the silence, Eric's hands trembled as he cut the umbilical cord, his tears mixing with the sweat on his brow. "She's here," he whispered, cradling the tiny, squirming bundle. Inu, exhausted but smiling, pressed a finger to Lyra's cheek. "Our legacy," she said, her voice barely above a breath. The crew of the USS Ohio, now anchored near a geothermal vent in the Arctic Ocean, received the news via a crackling radio link. Rachel Cortez, her hair streaked with gray from stress, clapped her hands once. "We've got a future," she declared, though her eyes lingered on the sub's hydroponic tanks, where spirulina mats grew sluggishly under UV lights. "Time to step up our game." Carter, now the sub's chief engineer, nodded. "We'll retrofit the mess hall into a nursery. No radiation's touching that kid." In Antarctica, Anna Marquez stood before the Heritage Vault, a reinforced chamber buried 300 meters below the ice. Its walls, lined with molybdenum alloy plates, glinted in the dim light from her headlamp. She placed a final seed jar, corn, Z. May's mutant strain, for Sievert's tolerance, into the vault, her glove hand lingering on the cold glass. Beside it lay a digital archive, genomes of every survivor, scanned and stored on a radiation-hardened drive, along with a message etched in English, Russian, and Mandarin. A last nod to humanity's diversity. We existed. We fought. We left this for whoever comes next. Back in Thule, Eric and Inu pored over a map of the Arctic, marking safe zone for Lyra's first steps. The soil, now at 0.08 sievert/day, down from 0.15, thanks to volcanic ash filtration, bore the first signs of lichen colonization, a slow, silent repair of the irradiated Earth. Inu taught Lyra to recognize the constellations, pointing to Proxima Centauri. "That star," she said, "watched us struggle, but we didn't let it win." On the Ohio, the crew initiated Project New Shores, using Thule seed filtration data to grow nutrient-rich algae in the sub's tanks. Dr. Patel, now a reluctant pediatrician, monitored Lyra's health via video link, marveling at her robust vitals, a testament to Inu's prenatal care and the radiation-resistant genes passed down. "She's a survivor," he said, "just like all of us." Years passed, marked by small victories. The first barley harvest in Thule, stunted but edible, the Ohio's successful surface run to a Canadian research station, now a ghost town, but yielding more seeds, and Delta Base's transformation into a lichen farm, where the resilient organisms absorbed radiation from the air and soil. Anna, now in her twilight years, often sat by the vault, recalling Leeway's final words. "Life finds a way, even when we can't see it." Lyra, now 10, accompanied Eric on scavenging trips, her laughter echoing in the Arctic silence as she collected seeds from abandoned greenhouses. "Dad," She said one day, holding a sprig of kale that had sprouted in a lead-lined box, "We're making it grow again." Eric nodded, his heart full. "Yes, kid, we are." Proxima Centauri flickered, as it had for eons, but on Earth a new chapter unfolded. The survivors, though few, had become stewards of a fragile rebirth. Their legacy was not grand, no cities, no empires, but quiet persistence, a refusal to let the universe's indifference snuff out life. In the ice, in the sea, and in the hearts of those who remained, hope endured, not as a flame, but as a slow burn, waiting for the day when the world might heal. And so, the story ended not with an explosion, but with a whisper, a seed planted, a child laughing, a star watching, and life, stubborn and unbroken, carrying on.